They called him a genius, but he spent his final years trying to escape everything he had. The world at his fingertips, a name whispered with awe in the grandest halls of learning, a mind that could dissect the universe with a single elegant thought. They called him a genius, a titan, a beacon of human intellect. His pronouncements shaped the discourse of generations. His theories were the bedrock upon which empires of knowledge were built. He stood on a precipice, not of failure, but of overwhelming, suffocating success. Yet in the twilight of his years, this celebrated figure, this architect of profound understanding, found himself consumed by a single, desperate yearning to escape, to vanish, to shed the very skin of his acclaimed identity and disappear from the world that so adored him. It's a paradox that chills the soul, isn't it? The pinnacle of achievement, becoming the very cage from which one desperately seeks liberation. This isn't merely an anecdote from a forgotten biography. It's a mirror held up to a profound, often unspoken crisis that simmers beneath the surface of our modern lives. We are, many of us, chasing this very notion of genius, this ideal of accomplishment, this relentless pursuit of external validation. We meticulously craft our digital personas, curate our achievements, and strive for recognition, believing that this is the path to fulfillment, to meaning. We pour our energy into building legacies, into leaving an indelible mark, into becoming someone important. But what happens when the echo of that importance becomes a deafening roar, drowning out the quiet whispers of our own selves? What happens when the edifice we've so painstakingly constructed feels less like a sanctuary and more like a prison? This is the silent epidemic of the accomplished soul, the dread that can creep in when the applause fades, or worse, when it never truly satisfies. Our contemporary world, in its dazzling complexity and relentless pace, amplifies this tension. We are bombarded with images of success, with narratives of effortless brilliance, with the seductive promise that more is always better. More followers, more accolades, more things. We are encouraged to optimize every moment, to monetize our passions, to turn our very existence into a performance. And in this grand theater of life, where every act is scrutinized and every misstep amplified, the pressure to maintain the facade of genius, of unwavering competence, can become an unbearable weight. We become so adept at projecting an image of control, of knowing, that we often lose touch with the messy, uncertain, vulnerable core of our humanity. The very qualities that make us truly alive, our doubts, our fears, our capacity for wonder and even for error, are often deemed liabilities in the relentless pursuit of an idealized self. This yearning for escape, this profound disillusionment that can accompany even the most brilliant of lives, is not a new phenomenon. It speaks to a deeper, more ancient human struggle, a wrestling with the very nature of selfhood and the elusive quest for authentic existence. It's the cry of a soul overwhelmed by the clamor of the external world, seeking refuge in the quietude of introspection. It's the realization that the grand pronouncements, the celebrated theories, the very identity forged through external acclaim, might not be the true source of peace or even of genuine understanding. The celebrated figure's desire to escape wasn't a rejection of his intellect, but perhaps a profound recognition that true wisdom lies not just in what we know, but in what we are willing to unlearn, in what we are willing to shed, in the quiet spaces where the ego finally falls silent. This journey, then, is an invitation to explore that profound paradox, how the very things we strive for can become the very things we need to transcend, and how in that transcendence we might finally find the freedom we so desperately seek. It's a path less traveled, one that asks us to confront the dazzling illusion of external perfection and to seek the quiet, unvarnished truth within. The very notion of genius, so often lauded and sought after, can paradoxically become a gilded cage, trapping the individual in a performance of self that stifles authentic growth. This isn't about downplaying intellect or achievement. Rather, it's about recognizing that the identity of genius can ossify the spirit. When one is perpetually seen as the infallible source of insight, the pressure to never falter, to always possess the definitive answer, becomes immense. This creates a profound internal dissonance, the outward projection of absolute certainty, warring with the inner reality of human fallibility and the ever-present potential for doubt. Such a state can lead to a deep-seated fear of exposure, a constant anxiety that the mask will slip, revealing not a flawed human, but a fraud. Consequently, the pursuit of genuine understanding, which inherently involves exploration, experimentation, and even outright mistakes, becomes a perilous endeavor, one that risks shattering the carefully constructed image. This internal conflict finds a powerful echo in the philosophical explorations of existentialism, particularly as articulated by thinkers like Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard spoke of the sickness unto death, a despair born not from external hardship, but from a fundamental disharmony within the self. For the celebrated genius, this sickness can manifest as a profound alienation from their own lived experience. They may become so accustomed to operating from a detached analytical vantage point, to dissecting the world and others with their formidable intellect, that they lose touch with the visceral, immediate reality of their own emotions and intuitions. Their self becomes a concept, a theory to be managed, rather than a dynamic, evolving entity to be lived. This can lead to a peculiar form of paralysis. The mind, so adept at constructing complex arguments, finds itself incapable of navigating the simple, messy terrain of personal feeling, or making decisions that are not rigorously justifiable by external logic, thus further reinforcing the reliance on the genius persona. Furthermore, consider the psychological phenomenon of the imposter syndrome, a concept that, while often associated with those experiencing success, takes on a unique dimension when applied to individuals perceived as titans of intellect. While many might experience doubt about their qualifications, for the perceived genius, this doubt can be more insidious. It's not merely a feeling of inadequacy, but a terrifying certainty that their achievements are the result of luck, deception, or a momentary lapse in others' judgment, rather than genuine merit. This internal narrative actively undermines any positive feedback, twisting compliments into evidence of others' gullibility. Consequently, instead of embracing their successes as affirmations, they become fuel for the anxiety, reinforcing the belief that they are perpetually on the verge of being found out. This perpetual state of vigilance against exposure can be utterly exhausting, draining the very energy that might otherwise be directed towards creative exploration or personal well-being. Now let's pivot to how this plays out in the fabric of everyday life, particularly for those who, while not necessarily world-renowned geniuses, feel the pressure to constantly perform competence. Think of the executive who dreads attending meetings, not because they lack the information, but because they fear a question will expose a gap in their knowledge they haven't had time to meticulously fill. Or the artist who avoids showing unfinished work, convinced that any imperfection will irrevocably damage their reputation, thus hindering the very iterative process that leads to breakthroughs. This phenomenon extends to personal relationships too. Imagine a partner who feels compelled to always have the right advice, the wise perspective, stifling their own vulnerability and the potential for deeper intimacy that comes from shared struggle and mutual reliance. The striving for an unassailable intellectual or creative standing can, in essence, erect invisible walls, isolating the individual from the very human connections and experiences that imbue life with its richest meaning. This internal struggle, The tension between the lauded identity and the authentic self can manifest in a yearning for anonymity, for a space where the weight of expectation is lifted. It's the desire to simply be, without the burden of being perceived as something extraordinary. It's the quiet longing to engage with the world, not as a source of pronouncements or solutions, but as a place of simple, unadorned presence. This is where the true escape begins, not through physical flight, but through a radical reorientation of the self, a shedding of the performance, and a courageous embrace of the ordinary, the imperfect, the beautifully, messily human. It's in this space, stripped of the need for external validation, that a different kind of genius can emerge, the genius of presence, of genuine connection, and of profound, uncalculated being. The individual burdened by the mantle of perceived genius often finds themselves navigating a labyrinth of societal expectations that extend far beyond mere intellectual output. There's a subtle yet pervasive pressure to embody a certain persona, one of unwavering confidence, profound insight, and often a detached, almost stoic demeanor. This expectation can morph into a demand for perpetual availability, a sense that their unique gifts should be deployed on demand, irrespective of their internal state or personal needs. Consequently, the pursuit of a quiet, contemplative life, a necessary phase for genuine synthesis and personal renewal, becomes a luxury they feel they cannot afford. The world, eager to extract more brilliance, fails to recognize that true innovation and deep understanding are often born in moments of stillness, in the fertile ground of unhurried thought, and in the courage to simply be without producing. Building on this, consider how this pressure impacts the very nature of personal relationships. When one is constantly positioned as the oracle, the one with all the answers, it can inadvertently create a chasm between them and others. Friends, family, even colleagues might hesitate to share their own struggles or uncertainties, fearing they are imposing on the genius, or worse, revealing a perceived inadequacy in themselves by not already possessing the wisdom the genius is expected to dispense. This can lead to a profound sense of isolation, a feeling of being perpetually on a pedestal, observed but rarely truly known or met on equal footing. The very connections that nourish the human spirit, that provide solace and perspective, can wither under the weight of this imposed, unassailable status. The genius, in their desire to serve, can unintentionally erect barriers that prevent the authentic exchange of vulnerability and mutual support. Furthermore, this societal framing often overlooks the fundamental human need for exploration and the acceptance of error. The path to any significant insight is rarely linear. It is a winding road marked by false starts, dead ends, and moments of profound confusion. However, for someone branded as a genius, admitting to such a process can feel like a betrayal of their public image. This can lead to a suppression of genuine inquiry, a reluctance to venture into uncharted intellectual territories for fear of not immediately mastering them. The creative spirit, which thrives on experimentation and the freedom to fail, can become stifled. Instead of embracing the messy, iterative nature of discovery, the individual might retreat to safer, more familiar intellectual ground, reinforcing their existing reputation, but sacrificing the potential for truly groundbreaking, transformative work. Now consider how this plays out when you encounter individuals who, while not holding public acclaim, feel a similar internal pressure to project an image of constant competence in their professional or personal lives. Think of the dedicated educator who feels they must never admit to not knowing an answer, or the skilled artisan who fears showing a piece with a minor flaw. They too can experience a form of burnout, a depletion of their creative energy, not from the demands of their work itself, but from the exhausting effort of maintaining an illusion of infallible expertise. This often leads to a deep-seated dissatisfaction, a feeling that their true selves are being neglected, even sacrificed, on the altar of public perception. The relentless drive to appear perfect, to always be on, can erode the very joy and passion that initially fueled their pursuits. Another crucial layer is the psychological toll of this perpetual performance on one's sense of self-worth. When an individual's value is primarily derived from external recognition of their intellectual or creative prowess, their internal sense of identity becomes fragile. Their self-esteem becomes inextricably linked to the continuous affirmation of their genius. This creates a precarious existence where any perceived slight, any lack of immediate acclaim can trigger profound insecurity. The pursuit of genuine meaning, which often lies in intrinsic values and self-acceptance, is sidelined in favor of the constant, often futile, quest for external validation. This can lead to a cycle of seeking, achieving, and then feeling hollow, a relentless treadmill of accomplishment that ultimately fails to provide lasting contentment. The individual becomes defined not by who they are, but by what they are perceived to do or know, leading to a profound disconnect from their own authentic being. The very pursuit of an idealized intellectual self can inadvertently cultivate a profound detachment from the embodied experience of existence. This isn't merely about abstract thought, it's about the physical and emotional reality of being a sentient creature. When one's identity is so heavily tethered to cognitive prowess, the sensory richness of life, the taste of food, the warmth of the sun, the subtle shifts in one's own physiological state, can become background noise, perceived as distractions from the real work of thinking. This disembodiment can lead to a peculiar form of chronic dissatisfaction, a sense that something vital is missing, even amidst intellectual triumphs. The world, experienced through a purely analytical lens, loses its vibrancy, its capacity to evoke awe or deep emotional resonance. The celebrated mind, while dissecting the universe, may find itself unable to truly inhabit it, leading to an existential emptiness that no amount of intellectual achievement can fill. Furthermore, this detachment can manifest as a profound difficulty in navigating the inherent ambiguities and paradoxes of human relationships. True connection often demands an acceptance of imperfection, both in ourselves and in others. It requires a willingness to engage with emotional complexities, to sit with discomfort, and to offer empathy without necessarily having a definitive solution. However, the individual accustomed to operating from a position of intellectual certainty may find themselves ill-equipped for these fluid, often irrational dynamics. They might attempt to solve emotional problems with logic or withdraw when faced with feelings they cannot neatly categorize or control. This can lead to strained interactions, misunderstandings, and a pervasive sense of loneliness, even when surrounded by people. The very brilliance that allows them to command respect in intellectual spheres can, ironically, alienate them in the intimate landscape of the heart. Another crucial facet of this internal struggle is the erosion of spontaneous creativity. Genuine innovation doesn't always arise from deliberate effort or structured analysis. Often, it emerges from a playful, almost childlike engagement with the world, from allowing the mind to wander, to make unexpected connections, and to embrace serendipity. However, the pressure to consistently produce genius can instill a fear of unproductive time, a compulsion to fill every moment with purposeful activity. This can stifle the very conditions necessary for breakthroughs. Imagine a composer who, fearing they won't produce a masterpiece, meticulously plans every note, thereby stifling the organic unfolding of melody and harmony. Or a writer who, under pressure for their next acclaimed novel, meticulously outlines every plot point, inadvertently draining the narrative of its surprise and organic life. This self-imposed rigidity, born from the need to uphold a reputation, can paradoxically lead to a decline in the very quality and originality that earned them that reputation. Consider how this plays out in less public spheres. Think of the seasoned executive who, having achieved a high level of professional success, finds themselves increasingly bored and disengaged. They might have mastered their field, their strategic thinking impeccable, yet they lack the spark, the passionate curiosity that once drove them. This isn't due to a lack of intelligence, but rather a consequence of having optimized their cognitive processes to the point where novelty and challenge have diminished. Their genius has become a well-worn path, comfortable but devoid of discovery. Consequently, they might seek out increasingly extreme forms of stimulation or retreat into a state of passive observation, unable to find genuine engagement in the very domain they once excelled in. Their intellectual prowess, once a source of dynamism, has become a source of stagnation. Moreover, the emphasis on external validation can warp an individual's perception of personal growth. True growth often involves confronting one's limitations, acknowledging blind spots, and embracing the discomfort of learning. However, if one's identity is built on the foundation of being a genius, admitting to areas of ignorance or weakness can feel like a catastrophic failure. This can lead to a defensive posture, a resistance to new ideas that challenge their existing framework, and a tendency to surround themselves with sycophants rather than genuine intellectual sparring partners. The rich, transformative potential of intellectual humility, of recognizing the vastness of what one doesn't know, is sacrificed for the illusion of complete mastery. This intellectual insularity, while perhaps preserving an image of infallibility, ultimately stunts the very capacity for profound understanding and personal evolution that defines true wisdom. As we stand on the cusp of this contemplation, having journeyed through the intricate landscapes of outward acclaim and inner yearning, a particular resonance begins to emerge. It's akin to observing the slow bloom of a rare flower, where each petal's unfurling, though distinct, contributes to the singular beauty of the whole. The pressures that shape the outward projection of brilliance, the subtle ways these demands can sculpt the inner architecture of the self, and the profound sense of disconnect that can arise when the internal compass falters. These are not isolated incidents, but interconnected facets of a deeper human experience. The very systems we build, both societal and personal, to honor and harness exceptional minds, can, in their well-intentioned rigor, inadvertently create a profound alienation from the essential, unadorned self. This intricate dance between external expectation and internal reality, between the celebrated persona and the private soul, points towards a fundamental question about where true fulfillment resides. Drawing these threads together, we perceive a common current running through the various expressions of this modern dilemma. It's the subtle yet pervasive paradox that the very structures designed to elevate and celebrate can, if not approached with profound self-awareness, lead to a form of internal diminishment. The relentless pursuit of an unassailable image, the pressure to perform a singular version of oneself, can create a hollow echo where a vibrant inner life should thrive. This journey has illuminated the ways in which the external markers of success, when allowed to define our very essence, can become a source of profound isolation, obscuring the simpler, more elemental truths of human existence. It's as if we've been meticulously polishing a magnificent sculpture, only to realize that in doing so, we've obscured the very quarry from which it was hewn, the raw, vital material that gave it life. In light of these insights, the path forward begins to clarify, not as a destination to be reached, but as a way of being to be cultivated. The experience has underscored that the quest for meaning is not solely an intellectual endeavor, nor is it found in the ceaseless accumulation of external validation. Instead, it suggests a reorientation, a turning inward not to escape the world, but to engage with it from a place of deeper authenticity. This contemplative arc has moved us from the dazzling heights of public perception to the quiet, often overlooked terrain of personal being, hinting that the most profound discoveries may lie not in the grand pronouncements, but in the humble, courageous act of self-recognition. As we pivot towards the final reflection, we are poised to consider where this convergence of ideas ultimately leads us, inviting a profound re-evaluation of how we navigate our own lives. The narrative we've woven, from the whispered awe of genius to the quiet desperation of escape, reveals a fundamental truth about the human condition, the profound disconnect that can arise when our external identity eclipses our internal landscape. We've seen how the relentless pursuit of acclaim, the meticulous cultivation of a flawless persona, can paradoxically lead to a deep alienation from oneself, a state where the dazzling edifice of achievement becomes a gilded cage. The very brilliance that earns admiration can, if unchecked by self-awareness, insulate us from the messy, vibrant and ultimately nourishing reality of our own lived experience. This isn't a condemnation of intellect or accomplishment, but rather a gentle illumination of the delicate balance required to honor both the outward expression of our gifts and the inward sanctuary of our authentic selves. The genius who yearns to disappear is not rejecting their mind, but perhaps finally recognizing that the deepest wisdom lies not in pronouncements, but in presence, not in control, but in surrender to the unfolding mystery of being. This realization invites a recalibration of our aspirations. The siren call of external validation, though powerful, often leads us away from the source of genuine contentment. True fulfillment, it seems, is not found in the applause of the crowd, but in the quiet resonance of our own inner knowing. It's about understanding that our worth is not contingent upon our perceived brilliance or our societal standing, but on the simple, profound act of inhabiting our lives with courage and authenticity. The escape we seek is not from the world, but from the performance of self that the world often demands. It is an invitation to shed the burdensome mask of infallibility and to embrace the liberating vulnerability of simply being human, flawed, searching, and beautifully imperfect. The journey from the celebrated Titan to the yearning recluse is not a fall from grace, but a potential ascent into a more profound, more integrated form of existence. The true practice begins now, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet cultivation of self-awareness. It is in the moments we choose to listen to our inner whispers over the external clamor, to honor our need for rest over the compulsion to produce, to embrace uncertainty as an opportunity for growth rather than a threat to our identity. This isn't about abandoning our talents or dimming our light. It's about ensuring that our light shines from a place of inner integrity, a source untainted by the desperate need for approval. It's about understanding that the most profound insights are often born not in the spotlight, but in the quietude of self-reflection, where the echoes of the world fade and the authentic voice of the soul can finally be heard. This ongoing dialogue between our inner and outer worlds is the very crucible of a meaningful life, a testament to the enduring human capacity for growth, for transformation, and for a quiet, unassailable